Ben stood on the edge of the village square, the snow falling like silent accusations, each flake a reminder of how the world could bury a man without warning. His breath hung in the air, a ghostly veil that blurred the line between him and the encroaching night. The blackout had struck without mercy, plunging the mountain hamlet into an abyss where streetlights once promised safety, now just skeletal poles clawing at the dark. In his mind, the wires hummed a phantom static from that day years ago when his hands had faltered and a spark had stolen a life. Why here? Why now? He thought, his fingers twitching in his gloves as if they could rewind time or mend what was irrevocably frayed. The cold seeped through his coat, mirroring the numbness in his chest, a void where purpose had once wired him together. Then from the shrouded alley ahead, a faint glow emerged, swaying gently like a heartbeat refusing to stop. It was no ordinary light. It cut through the flakes with an eerie steadiness attached to something moving low and deliberate. Ben's heart stuttered. Was it a trick of the snow or something calling him from the shadows he feared most? The village lay swallowed by the night, its narrow streets transformed into frozen rivers of shadow, where snowdrifts piled like forgotten regrets against the timber walls of cabins. Power lines sagged under the weight of ice-lifeless veins that once pulsed with the hum of electricity Ben knew too well, now silent, accusing him of every failure. He trudged forward, boots crunching through the crust, the sound echoing like brittle bones underfoot. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, heavy with the promise of isolation. In the distance, the community hall flickered weakly with candlelight, a feeble heart beating against the blackout's grip, where villagers huddled like moths drawn to the last embers. Whispers carried on the wind. The grid's down for good this time. No one's coming up the pass in this storm. Each word a thorn in Ben's side, reminding him how his expertise had become a curse. Ben's mind crackled like a faulty circuit, the blackout amplifying the static in his thoughts until it drowned out the whisper of falling snow. He gripped the flashlight in his pocket, useless now, its beam swallowed by the dark, just like his confidence had been that fateful day. The accident replayed in vivid bursts, the warehouse lit by harsh fluorescence wires coiling like serpents in his hands, his colleague's laugh turning to a gasp as the spark leaped, hungry and unforgiving. A scream, then silence heavier than any storm. Why hadn't he double-checked? The question looped endlessly, his hands trembling not from the cold, but from the ghost of that miswired moment, fingers that once danced over panels now clenched in futile regret. Ben's gaze locked on the lingering glow, the lantern swaying gently like a pendulum, counting down to some inevitable shift, casting elongated shadows that twisted across the snow like fractured memories reaching out. The German shepherd stood motionless, its scarred muzzle etched in the light's amber hue, eyes deep pools reflecting not just the flame, but something watchful, almost knowing, as if it carried its own burdens, invisible wires tangled in its soul. A villager shuffled past, muttering under his breath. That lantern belonged to old Tomas the miner who vanished last winter. Strange it's tied to that stray now. The words hung in the air, laced with the chill of unspoken mysteries, sparking a curiosity in Ben that warred with his instinct to retreat. He hesitated, boots rooted in the snow, the cold biting at his toes like doubt nipping at his resolve. But the dog's gaze held him a silent invitation, or perhaps a challenge, promising that following this light might rewire the darkness within. With a slow step forward, Ben felt the pull, sensing that this encounter could unravel the knots of his isolation, or tighten them forever. The past clung to Ben like frayed insulation on an old wire, ready to spark at the slightest touch. In flashbacks that hit him like voltage surges, he saw himself younger, vibrant under the fluorescent buzz of the city workshop tools, dancing in his steady hands as he wired panels with the precision of a surgeon. Laughter echoed, then his colleague Mark's easy grin, the shared coffee breaks where dreams of bigger jobs flowed freely. But one rain-slicked afternoon, the storm outside mirrored the one brewing in his haste, a crossed connection, a overlooked ground, and then the arc, a blinding flash that turned Mark's shout into a choked silence, his body crumpling like a shorted fuse. Ben had stood there, hands smoking from the heat, the acrid smell of burned rubber searing his lungs, while sirens wailed in the distance like accusations he couldn't outrun. The investigation cleared him human error, they said, but the guilt fused to his soul, shattering the man who once lit up rooms with his energy. He fled to this remote village, trading city lights for mountain shadows, hoping the isolation would dim the memories. Yet the blackout amplified them, making every dark corner a warehouse replica, his trembling hands a constant reminder of the life he'd extinguished. The lantern's glow outside pulled him back, a faint echo of the sparks he feared, whispering that redemption might lie in following its path, even if it led straight into the storm of his regrets. Ben's days unspooled in a monotonous loop, a circuit of avoidance wired tight against the world, each action a buffer against the pain that simmered beneath. He rose before dawn in his cramped cabin, the wood stove's faint crackle, the only sound piercing the silence, its heat barely touching the chill that had settled in his bones like frost on exposed wires. Coffee, brewed black and bitter, sipped while staring at the frost-laced window where the mountain loomed like an indifferent judge. No calls to answer, no friends to meet, just the ritual of checking his toolbox pliers, aligned wires coiled neatly as if order there could mend the chaos inside. Afternoons blurred into inspections of the village grid, his steps mechanical along snow-packed paths, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who offered nods. He couldn't return his mind, a blank screen flickering with suppressed static. Evenings found him alone with a bottle, the amber liquid dulling the edges, but never erasing the phantom hum of that fatal spark, his phone screen glowing with unread messages from a life he'd severed. The blackout shattered this fragile routine, trapping him in the cabin's dim confines, tools scattered unused on the table, his thoughts coiling tighter like overheated cables. Through the window, the distant lantern bobbed like a challenge to his numbness, its steady light piercing the veil he'd drawn around himself, stirring a reluctant curiosity that threatened to reconnect him to the world he'd shorted out. Lantern's past lingered in the shadows of his scarred frame, a tapestry of betrayal woven into every hesitant step he took through the snow-draped village. Once a prized mine rescue dog, his days had been filled with the clang of tools and the deep earth rumble of shafts, his keen nose guiding miners like Tomas through labyrinths of rock and dust, their bond a lifeline in the suffocating dark. Thomas's whistle had been his command, the lantern strapped to his harness a beacon of trust, its glow cutting through fumes as they emerged triumphant from collapses, the man's hand rough but kind on his fur. But one storm-ravaged night the mine gave way in a thunderous betrayal, beams cracking like broken promises, Tomas vanishing into the void amid shouts and falling debris. Lantern had dug frantically, paws bleeding against jagged stone, his barks echoing unanswered until exhaustion claimed him. Abandoned in the aftermath, the mine workers, harsh men with calloused hearts, turned on him, their kicks and chains leaving welts that faded slower than the mistrust in his eyes, his once proud muzzle marred by a jagged scar from a boot's cruel edge. He escaped into the wild survival, a solitary grind scavenging in the shadows of the mountain, his instincts sharpened to a blade's edge against any hand that approached. Now, with the lantern mysteriously retied by whose hand a whisper of fate, he roamed the blackout's veil, his body lean and wired for flight, the light swaying like a reluctant memory. His gaze, steady yet haunted, carried the weight of lost loyalty, mirroring the hollow ache of those he encountered, his silent pain a parallel to Ben's guilt, both survivors of collapses that left them fractured and wary. In the flickering glow, Lantern's breaths came even, but his ears twitched at every crunch of snow, a sentinel betrayed, yet unbowed his presence a quiet testament to endurance in the face of abandonment. In the hushed expanse of the snowbound village, Ben and Lantern shared a silent communion of brokenness, their emptiness reflecting like twin shadows cast by the lantern's unsteady flame. Ben saw his own fractured soul in the dog's wary eyes, deep amber pools that held the echo of betrayal, much like the guilt that pooled in his chest, unspilled but ever present. The dog's scarred muzzle, a map of endured violence, paralleled Ben's trembling hands, both marked by failures not entirely their own, yet carried as indelible burdens. Lantern sensed it too, his head tilting slightly as Ben approached, not with fear, but a cautious recognition, as if the man's hesitant steps mirrored his own prowling gait through life's debris. Their healing began in these mirrored glimpses. Ben's slow exhale matching the dog's measured breaths, the cold air between them thick with unspoken parallels, the mind's collapse echoing the warehouse spark, both sudden ruptures that severed trust. A shared glance and the falling snow sealed the nascent bond, Ben's fingers unclenching, as Lantern's ears perked not in alarm, but curiosity, their mutual vulnerability, a bridge over the chasm of isolation. As the Lantern's light danced across their forms, it illuminated the path ahead, steps in tandem. Where one faltered, the other steadied their arcs, intertwining like wires, finding connection, promising that from shared emptiness could spark a quiet mutual rebirth. The snowstorm howled like a beast unchained, whipping flakes into a frenzy that stung Ben's face as he followed the elusive glow deeper into the village's outskirts. Lantern moved with unerring purpose, his harnessed light slicing through the swirling white, casting ethereal beams that danced across the frozen ground, like fingers beckoning from the grave. The wind carried a faint, desperate cry, muffled human threading through the gale like a frayed wire sparking in the dark. Ben's heart hammered the sound, piercing his self-imposed numbness, a visceral shock that rooted him in place. His eyes widened at the sight of the abandoned mine's jagged mouth ahead, yawning black against the snow, its rusted beams groaning under the storm's assault. The air reeked of wet earth and decay, the cold biting deeper as Lantern paused at the edge. His scarred body, taut ears pricked toward the depths, where the cry echoed again, urgent and raw. Ben's breath caught the visual of the dog's steady gaze locking onto his own, heightening the tension as if Lantern were silently imploring him to act. The Lantern's flame flickering wildly yet unextinguished, mirroring the fragile spark of compassion igniting in Ben's chest amidst the chaos. Ben's mind waged a silent war at the mine's precipice, logic clashing with the pull of empathy like crossed wires threatening to short. Why risk it? His thoughts screamed memories of Mark's fall, flooding back the warehouse collapse in slow motion, the helpless drop into darkness. Ben's hands too late to catch him, the guilt, a chasm wider than this shaft. Caring meant pain, reopening wounds he'd buried under layers of isolation. The storm's roar amplified his fear, snow lashing his face as if to drive him back to safety. Yet Lantern nudged his gloved hand, the dog's warm breath a startling contrast to the icy gale, his eyes holding a plea that transcended words, scarred, yet trusting a subtle sign that tipped the scales. Compassion surged, overriding the logical retreat, Ben's trembling fingers clenching as he whispered to himself, "Not this time," the internal argument resolving in a reluctant nod toward the unknown depths. Ben's descent into the mine was a chaotic plunge, rocks skittering underfoot like warnings ignored, his flashlight beam jittering alongside Lantern's steady glow that pierced the suffocating black like a defiant spark. The air thickened with dust and damp, each breath a gritty rasp as Lantern led with purposeful strides, his paws navigating the uneven shaft floor with an instinct born of old traumas. Ben's hands shook as he gripped the rope he'd improvised from his belt, lowering himself inch by inch, the trapped man's groans growing louder, a haunting echo that spurred him on despite the fear coiling in his gut. Slipping on loose gravel, Ben tumbled a short distance, scraping his palms raw, the pain a sharp reminder of his vulnerability. Lantern paused, turning back with a low whine, his lantern casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. With a grunt, Ben reached the bottom, the glow revealing the miner's form pinned under a beam face, pale and streaked with dirt, eyes fluttering in desperation. Imperfect and messy. Ben heaved at the wood muscles, straining splinters biting into his skin, until with a final irreversible shove, the beam shifted, freeing the man in a cloud of dust. Lantern stood guard, his presence a silent anchor as Ben hauled the miner up the act, sealing his commitment in sweat and resolve. The trek back to the community hall was a labored procession through the storm's fading fury. Ben's arms aching under the miner's weight draped over his shoulders like a living burden of redemption. Lantern trotted ahead, his lantern's light a guiding thread through the snow, its sway a rhythmic promise amid the wind's dying howls. Inside the hall, flickering candles cast warm islands in the gloom, villagers parting like a sea as Ben lowered the man onto a makeshift cot, his breaths ragged but steady. Rosa the nurse rushed forward, her skilled hands checking for injuries, her face a mask of focused concern that hid her own shadows. Ben stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, offering a bowl of water to Lantern, who lapped tentatively at first, then with growing ease, his eyes softening in the candlelight, a first whisper of trust. The dog settled nearby, not touching, but close his scarred body, relaxing fractionally, the lantern dimmed but enduring. In that moment, Ben felt a silent vow take root, mirrored in Rosa's grateful glance and the miner's faint nod. The air hummed with fragile connection, the act of care weaving threads of healing where isolation had frayed them, promising that from this messy impulse, something unbreakable might emerge. In the dimly lit community hall, where candles sputtered like hesitant breaths against the Blackout's lingering grip, Lantern carved out his territory in the shadows, his body a coiled spring of caution amid the murmur of villagers. He growled softly at approaching strangers, a low rumble that vibrated through the wooden floors like distant thunder, his scarred muzzle twitching with memories of boots and chains that had taught him the cost of proximity. Ben watched from a respectful distance, leaning against a beam, his own guarded heart echoing the dog's, both armored against the world, their eyes meeting in brief silent acknowledgments that neither dared to bridge. The lantern on Lantern's harness cast elongated shadows that danced warily across the walls, mirroring Ben's internal barriers built from guilt's debris. He made no move to close the gap, understanding the language of space the way trust frayed when forced. Villagers whispered about the rescued miner, their voices a backdrop to the standoff, but Lantern's gaze remained fixed on Ben, a flicker of curiosity beneath the wariness, as if recognizing a fellow sentinel in the night. Rosa moved among the cots, her empathetic touch a contrast to the tension, yet even she respected the invisible line, sensing the dog's need for solitude. In this mutual silence, the air thickened with potential, the dog's defensive posture, a mirror to Ben's withdrawn stance, neither initiating contact, their bond simmering in the unspoken promise of time. As the hall's warmth seeped into the chill of the night, Ben knelt slowly by Lantern's side, his hand steadying as he noticed a fresh cut on the dog's paw, a jagged line weeping crimson against the fur like an unspoken confession. The dog flinched at first, a subtle recoil that mirrored Ben's own internal wince at vulnerability, but he stayed put, his eyes holding Ben's with a depth that spoke of parallel scars, Lantern's from the mine's harsh legacy, Ben's from the spark that stole a life. Gently, Ben cleaned the wound with a cloth dampened in water, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the smoky air, each touch a tentative bridge over their shared chasms of pain. Rosa, tending the miner nearby, paused to watch her face softening as she recognized the mirrored suffering the way Lantern's breath hitched like Ben's did in quiet moments, both bearing wounds that went beyond the flesh. The dog allowed the care his body, easing fractionally, a silent presence that connected them without words, the lantern's glow warming the space like a hesitant dawn. In this unspoken exchange, empathy flowed like a current, Ben's guilt echoing in Lantern's mistrust, their healing beginning in the quiet acknowledgement that pain, when shared, lost some of its isolating bite. The community hall's air hung heavy with the scent of damp wood and flickering candles, a sanctuary where time slowed to the rhythm of healing breaths. Lantern, who had lingered in the shadows like a ghost tethered to his scars, shifted suddenly, his paws padding softly across the creaking floor, each step a deliberate surrender that echoed in Ben's chest like a circuit finally closing. The dog approached with eyes lowered at first, then lifting to meet Ben's deep pools of amber, reflecting the lantern's glow as if sharing a secret light. Ben froze, his hand hovering midair, the tremble in his fingers a vestige of guilt now mingling with awe. Lantern pressed forward, resting his broad head on Ben's knee, the weight warm and unyielding, a physical anchor that pulled tears from the depths Ben had long sealed. Rosa, kneeling by the miner's cot, glanced up, her breath catching as recognition dawned. The miner's face, gaunt but familiar, was her brother's, estranged and lost, his eyes fluttering open to mirror her shock, tears streaming down her cheeks in silent catharsis. The fragile peace in the community hall began to fray as night deepened, the candles guttering like uneasy sentinels against the encroaching dark. Lantern's ears perked first, a subtle twitch that cut through the murmurs, his body tensing into an alert posture, hackles rising faintly, tail still as a frozen branch, his low growl rumbling like distant thunder, echoing old fears. Ben noticed the shift, a chill crawling up his spine as the dog's lantern swayed with each pace across the floor, casting jittery shadows that seemed to whisper of unseen threats. Rosa paused, intending her brother, her eyes darting to lantern's stillness, the air thickening with an instinctive unease that mirrored the dog's primal vigilance. Whispers among villagers grew rumors of sabotage, a local official's greed hiding mine violations, the Blackout. No accident but a veil for darker deeds. Lantern's gaze fixed on the door, nostrils flaring at some scent carried on the wind, his growl deepening a foreshadow of turmoil that stirred echoes of past traumas, the hall's warmth yielding to subtle tension, as if the mountain itself held its breath. The hall's uneasy calm shattered as Lantern erupted into a sharp bark, his body lunging toward a shadowed figure lurking at the door's edge, the lantern's glow swinging wildly like a pendulum of fury. The sound pierced the air, raw and primal, echoing off the wooden beams and jolting Rosa from her vigil by her brother's side, her heart slamming as memories crashed over her like a collapsing tunnel. Flashbacks of her brother's betrayal, the night he vanished after siphoning family savings for a doomed venture, leaving her to mend their mother's broken spirit alone. His face in her mind twisted with excuses, the scent of rain-soaked earth from that argument mingling with the hall's smoky haze, her hands clenching as old panic surged, shouting inwardly, "Why now, when I've just found you again?" Ben's guilt resurfaced in a tidal wave, his mind reeling back to the warehouse spark, fearing he'd failed once more. The dog's alarm, a siren, like the one that wailed too late for Mark, his breath shallow as he whispered to himself, "Not again, I can't let it happen." Lantern's aggression laid bare his past, abuse hackles raised and teeth bared in a snarl that revealed the scars of whips and neglect after the mine's closure, his eyes wild with recognition of cruelty that linked their trio's pain. Rosa's familial wound, Ben's self-inflicted torment. The dogs endured violence, all exploding in a cacophony of shouts and growls, the air electric with withdrawal as they recoiled, yet bound by the shared flood of emotion that threatened to drown or unite them. The door creaked open like a fracture in fragile peace, revealing the local official, Mayor Harlan, his face a mask of feigned concern twisted by greed, the man behind the Blackout sabotage to conceal deadly mine violations that lined his pockets with blood money. He stepped in boots thudding against the floor like judgments, his eyes narrowing at the scene, the air thickening with the metallic tang of tension as Lantern snarled ferociously, recognizing his abuser from the mine's dark days, the kicks that left scars, the chains that bound loyalty to fear. The dog's body quivered with primal rage, lantern light flashing across Harlan's smug features like accusatory sparks, his growl a deep vibration that rattled Ben's chest, stirring his own confrontation as he stood voice steady despite the internal storm. "You did this, cut the power to hide your rot." Rosa rose beside him, her face pale but fierce, flashbacks of her brother's disappearance fueling her glare, the official's presence a tangible threat that made her brother's cot seem vulnerable. His awakening groans a weak accusation piercing the standoff. Harlan sneered, hand-inching toward a concealed tool, the room's candles flickering as if recoiling the emotional charge, electric Ben's guilt transforming to protective fire. Rosa's betrayal igniting resolve, Lantern's snarl a bridge of shared trauma. The miner, Rosa's brother, stirred fully, eyes widening in recognition, his hoarse voice cutting through, "It was you. Buried the reports, left me to die." The confrontation peaked in a visceral clash. Harlan's denial, cracking under the weight of truths, unearthed the hall, a pressure cooker of physical posturing and emotional rawness. Bodies tensed for the inevitable lunge, the air alive with the scent of sweat and fear. Each heartbeat a countdown in this primal arena where past sins faced judgment. As Harlan's footsteps faded into the storm's howl, the hall exhaled a collective breath, the tension uncoiling like a wire released from strain, leaving behind a silence thick with the scent of spent candles and lingering fear. Lantern's snarl softened to a rumble, then quieted his body, easing as he padded back to Ben's side, lying down with a heavy sigh that mirrored Ben's own ragged exhale, the dog's warmth pressing against his leg like a wordless assurance. Regret washed over Ben in waves, his mind replaying the standoff the way his voice had cracked, the fear that he'd dragged everyone into his failures. Yet, as Lantern's eyes met his steady and forgiving, the weight lifted fractionally, a silent promise blooming in the shared gaze. Rosa knelt by her brother, her hands trembling as she adjusted his blanket, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. The embrace that followed was tentative arms wrapping around each other in a closure long denied her whispered, "I'm sorry," dissolving into the air like snow melting on warm stone. The minor, her brother, nodded weakly, his hand squeezing hers, the physical separation of years bridged in that touch, the hall's shadows retreating as candlelight steadied. Lantern's lantern glowed softly now, a beacon of reclaimed safety, its light casting gentle halos rather than accusatory flashes affirming the bond forged in crisis. Ben reached down his fingers, brushing the dog's fur, the contact a vow etched in silence, no more running, no more alone. As the group settled into a hushed vigil, trust reaffirmed through proximity, the dog curling closer. Rosa leaning on Ben's shoulder, the chapter of trauma closed with a quiet click like a lock turning home, anchoring them in mutual protection against the mountain's lingering whispers. The night deepened into a velvet shroud, but unease prickled the air like static before a storm, subtle signs weaving a tapestry of impending danger in the community hall's dim confines. Lantern's ears twitched first, a vigilant radar catching the faint crunch of snow outside, deliberate footsteps circling the building. His body language shifting from rest to readiness, hackles rising like frost on a wire as he paced toward the door with a low, insistent growl. Ben felt it too, a chill unrelated to the cold seeping through cracks, his instincts honed by years of guilt, alerting him to the shadows lengthening unnaturally across the floor, cast by a figure lurking in the moonlight. Rosa's brother stirred on his cot, his weakened form tensing as whispers from villagers confirmed the dread. Harlan's back seen him slinking near the mine, he's not done. The dog's lantern swayed with each step, its glow illuminating fresh tracks in the snow, visible through the window boot prints looping like a predator's path. Animal behavior mirroring the threat as a distant howl echoed the official's vengeful return. The community hall breathed softly in the aftermath, candles guttering low as if weary from the night's vigil, their flames casting long, languid shadows that stretched across the wooden floors like sighs of relief. Ben slumped against a wall, his body heavy with exhaustion, the scent of dust and sweat clinging to his skin, his breaths slow and deliberate, each one a pause in the storm's echo. Rosa moved with quiet grace, adjusting blankets over her brother, her hands lingering on his forehead, the minimal motion underscoring the fragile return to safety. Her brother's eyes fluttered open briefly, a faint smile breaking through the pain, but words remained unspoken, suspended in the air like unspoken gratitude. Lantern lay nearby, his flank rising and falling in steady rhythm. The lantern's glow dimmed to a soft ember, no longer a beacon of urgency, but a gentle reminder of endurance. The village's power hummed faintly back to life outside, a distant flicker through the windows. Yet inside the mood lingered in reflection. Ben's mind wandering through the mine's chaos, regrets softening into acceptance, the emotional void filling with tentative peace. Long sentences unfurled in his thoughts, pauses heavy with what-ifs, but the hall's hush enveloped them, a cocoon where survival bloomed quietly, movement sparse as healing began its slow weave. In the hall's warming embrace, healing unfolded in mirrored gestures, a sensory tapestry of recovery woven through steady, interwoven rhythms of breath and touch. Ben's eyes met Lantern's, the dog's gaze soft and unwavering, following him as he crossed the room to fetch water, the pad of paws echoing his steps like a shadow-turned companion. The air carried the faint musk of fur and earth, grounding Ben as he offered a bowl. Lantern lapping slowly, his tongue's rasp a rhythmic affirmation. Rosa turned to her brother, their hands intertwining fingers, tracing old scars in silent reconciliation, her touch light yet persistent, mirroring the way Lantern leaned into Ben's side, the dog's warmth seeping through like shared solace. Over time, the behaviors intertwined, Lantern eating from Ben's handtail, wagging in measured sweeps, while Rosa fed her brother broth, their eyes locking in moments of quiet understanding, emotions rising and falling in tandem waves. The scars on Lantern's muzzle seemed less stark in the candlelight, much like Ben's trembling hands steadied with each pet, the tempo of recovery building gradually, sensory details, enriching the bond, the soft huff of the dog's breath, the rustle of blankets, the subtle shift of weight as they lay close. Rosa's laughter bubbled softly at her brother's weak jest, echoing Ben's faint smile as Lantern nudged his knee, the group mirroring each other's easing tensions, healing not in grand leaps, but in repeated small actions that interlaced their arcs into a unified whole. The village streets gleamed under a breaking dawn, snow crunching softly beneath their steps, as Ben, Rosa, and Lantern walked side by side, the lantern swaying gently like a heartbeat syncing with their breaths. Lantern responded to Ben's soft call of his name, ears perking in recognition, his head tilting to rest against Ben's hand in an unexpected gesture of total trust, the warmth of fur against skin, releasing a flood of emotion that misted Ben's eyes. Rosa's fingers brushed her brother's arm in the distance behind them, but here the intimate focus narrowed to the trio's motion hands, steady eyes meeting in quiet affirmation, breaths mingling in the crisp air as fear's shadow dissolved into light. The symbolic act marked their rebirth, a quiet stride forward, where scars became stories, the lantern's glow fading with the rising sun, emblematic of hope reclaimed.